Hello, and welcome to another Missing Link webinar. I hope everybody can hear me. If you have any kind of technical issues, please just hit refresh. And yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jane. I'm the host of the Missing Link webinar. I'm also the co-founder of JBH, the digital PR agency, too. So we've got a really good webinar for you today. I'm really excited to have Adam, who is. I'll let Adam kind of tell you more about kind of his role at the Telegraph, yeah, and then we'll kind of discuss kind of how the pandemic, unfortunately, has been kind of affecting Adam's role, the types of pictures and stories that he kind of wants to feature. And yeah, and then we'll just kind of have a discussion about kind of the type like and any kind of additional KPIs. And I'm happy to say I've got Tara too. I wasn't sure whether Tara was going to join us because of some technical issues, so I'm really pleased to see Tara too. So yeah, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. This seems to be a really hot topic with everybody. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting bit of insight into obviously these journalists and their roles, and also kind of the differences between the publications too. And I think that will deliver some great insight. So what we'll do is we'll do kind of half an hour of kind of chatting, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. So please feel free to ask absolutely anything. There are no stupid questions. They're both lovely, so don't be afraid to ask anything. Before we begin, I'm just going to ask kind of both journalists to kind of tell everyone a little bit about their roles, and what they cover, and maybe kind of what their kind of day-to-day looks like. So maybe what the average day looks like in terms of kind of timings, kind of capacity, and kind of what you might have to do or get done in that time period. So would you like to go first, Adam? And I'm just gonna fiddle with the layout, so please just bear with me. There we go. So Adam, over to you to tell everyone a bit more about kind of your role. Excellent. Okay, that's a really good overview. Tara, would you like to do the same?
Yeah, sure, of course. I'm the digital consumer editor at The Sun. So I manage a team of 6 full-time journalists, and then a pool of freelancers as well. Ours is a bit more day-to-day breaking news. So I go to 2 conferences for online. So there's one at 9:15, and then there's one at 12:30 every day. So that's where we'll pitch into the editor of the website and backbench and talk about what kind of stories we're doing that day, anything breaking, any long-term planning stuff. And then my story is also going to print conference as well via the business editor. So it's across both, which is kind of work in progress. It's only just since before Christmas that we started working in that way. Before, I used to feed into the news editor on print. So they can be across both. So with us, people always say, when's the best time to get you in terms of sending you press releases or sending over stories? It's all the time. But to make those kind of deadlines, like especially if it was wanted for print, as much time as possible in advance, it also just helps us plan like who's going to cover what. And there's a real emphasis with us on breaking news. So big first to those big stories, and making sure that we've got all of the avenues covered, whether it be like the breaking news story or an explainer on what's happening.
Okay, perfect. So it sounds like there's more kind of yours is much kind of more quick, kind of reactive, very much kind of on a day-to-day basis, whereas there seems to kind of be more kind of planning and I don't know whether it's fair to say kind of more foresight, kind of, with a week rather than a day for you, Adam. Perfect. Okay. So, obviously, you're kind of in an acting role at the moment, Adam. But how? I mean, I hate to talk about the pandemic because I wonder if everyone's kind of a bit fed up of hearing about it. But obviously, it does have an impact on your roles and the kind of stories that obviously you're featuring. And it might be interesting to kind of know kind of what percentage of stories that you're running are kind of pandemic related at the moment? Even just kind of a guesstimate. Yeah. Is that the same for you, Tara?
I think it's really been interesting because obviously right at the beginning of the pandemic, which is like almost a year ago, and it seems really weird to say that, we were really focused on it. There was so much breaking news. It really took over our agenda. I mean, it was really just us about keeping our heads above water, just keeping going. Now that we have probably got used to it, and B, readers are a bit bored of it. I found that they want to read stuff that is also escapism,
Yeah.
because we cover such a wide area. So personal finance and money saving really key to what we cover, but also consumer and some business, but it's always going to be consumer focused online. So it's a really wide remit. So some of the stuff that we're seeing doing really well now isn't just pandemic focused, which is also refreshing for the team. And we're also starting to work on a bit more longer term stuff. So as part of my role and how it's changing is I've been involved in a lot more of the campaigns that we've been doing. I've always run campaigns for money, but I took part in the Jabs Army last month. So I helped with getting people to sign up to volunteering their staff. And also at the moment we're running a money special, which is running across print and online, which is about people fixing their finances during lockdown.
Yes.
So it is linked to the pandemic, and obviously it's been really interesting this year. As you probably all know, with personal finance, it can be quite calendar based, and it can be a struggle, especially online where readers, I think, are a bit more savvy to those kind of calendar dates and probably don't want to read as many stories that are linked to those calendar dates. It's been really refreshing because there's been so many new angles that we've been able to explore. So even with debt, which can become quite monotonous in terms of telling people the same advice, this year there was all the different schemes that people could claim from. There's all the additional help. There actually a lot of the debt charities that I spoke to said that they had seen, while they'd seen a rise in people, they'd also seen a rise in the amount of support that was available. So that's been really interesting in terms of how it shaped our coverage going forward.
That's a really interesting point because obviously there's a lot of negative at the moment. But are you after more of those positive stories and, any kind of data that represents anything kind of positive going on within personal finance and the economy, I guess?
Yeah, I think, It's interesting because it's got to be one or the other. It's got to be either a really negative story, those kind of personal case studies where somebody's lost a lot of money, they will tend to really resonate with readers. But in the same way, if there's a really positive one, we did one last week, which was a couple who saved like £7,000 by cutting their bills. And it did really well. And it was really nice to see such a positive story about somebody who was being really savvy with their money, doing really well. So I think there's a place for both of them.
Yeah. And is that the same for you, Adam, or are you more kind of in the middle at the Telegraph, so not wanting to present kind of either kind of extreme? Brilliant. Okay. So you both mentioned case studies. How much of a difference do kind of case studies make if PRs are pitching kind of stories to you? Say you're being pitched some data. If there's case studies to go with it, does that just make it a lot more powerful and usable for you?
Yeah, I think with data, what my biggest thing I'd say is we don't really use data within stories that may have been generated for like a really small source number. So we probably would only rely on data for a story if it's government or FOI or something that's really robust. The ones that we've used recently have been where an energy firm did a really deep dive into some data that just isn't available publicly, and it would have taken a really long time for us to put together, and I know it took them a really long time. So those kind of like those kind of data research pieces that in the past when I first started out were kind of like bread and butter,
Mm,
they definitely don't really work for us anymore. So it is the case study led stuff that will be more of use, because it's a really nice emotive way to keep readers engaged and tell that story from a really personal way, and I know that they all identify with it. So I definitely would say that if somebody has a case study that may be useful and fits within our demographic as well, I think that's really important. Then that would be of use. And the demographics for online and print are completely different. So I understand why people sometimes get confused with that as well. So with online, we're a lot younger, we're like 18 to 35, and a mix of income. So lower incomes, perhaps social, renting, and have no money to invest, would love to save, but possibly don't have savings. Whereas in the paper, but we also have another demographic online where they're slightly more affluent and are sort of more early adopters in technology, probably have, a digital bank, and maybe would love to invest, again, are not really sure, are definitely beginners.
yeah.
Whereas in the paper, the demographic is a lot older, especially seeing this week with our consumer crew where we've had people calling in. The demographic of those people who are calling in and emailing in is a lot older.
Okay.
And they are sort of the same affluence range, but we do have a few ABC ones because we reach so many people. I think it's inevitable that you're going to have a cross section of
Yeah,
kind of society as well.
definitely. Thank you. What about you, Adam, in terms of your kind of audience? If you can tell us more about that, that'd be really useful. Mm, okay. Okay. Okay, that's really interesting. And this is a question for both of you, really. There's a lot of use of things like Google Trends and pulling data from there. How do you feel about that as a data source?
Um, yeah, it's something we use ourselves. So we have an SEO team
Yeah.
who send us over trends every day and will tell us what kind of things are doing well. My team also writes for sun.com. So we do a couple of stories a day for the US. So we're actually targeting SEO content as part of that project.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm really interested in that. But chances are we might already be ahead of you.
Right. Okay.
And with search, I'm sure you know, it can be so fast changing,
Yeah.
what people are searching that morning and they might not be searching that evening. So I love it as context. And I always say with the kind of like data stories that we wouldn't use, I still love getting them because there probably is something still in them in terms of I like to know what's going on in those industries. I mean, I'll probably say that now and then get absolutely flooded, even more flooded than my email inbox is already, which can be a nightmare, especially on budget days where it literally just strobes. But I just think it's really great to have it in the inbox because it might become useful at some point.
Yeah. What about you, Adam? What are your thoughts on data from sources like Google Trends? Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
And with it, that's
Also,
sorry, you go.
I'm going to interrupt you there because I just had an interesting point. Sorry to interrupt. Interesting about the dwell times and what kind of data you're, measuring. Because one of our metrics that we're measured against is the amount of time that a user spends and the amount of pages that they consume. So that is kind of on our forefront as well, especially how we lay out stories online to encourage readers around the site. And also, as much as Google Trends is really important, I'd say probably half our traffic comes from social.
Right.
Which is really different to many other places that I've worked before, where like the homepage is a real big driver of traffic. And while we do get, significant traffic from the homepage, our Facebook audience is something that we are really catering for on a day-to-day basis. And I feel like I kind of know those readers inside out. So I always keep those in mind when we're putting together our news list.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, I was going to ask you kind of what other metrics you were kind of judged on or kind of objectives. Obviously, there'll be an element of kind of social engagement too, and you've mentioned Facebook. It'd be good to know from you, Adam, kind of what additional metrics you have to consider. Definitely. Okay. And in terms of kind of your kind of top performing content, Tara, you mentioned a story about a couple who saved 7,000, however much it was. What tends to be your best performing content? Are there specific topics that kind of do really well that we can kind of obviously, pitch to you?
Yeah, definitely. We are quite news focused, so it will be on like the news agenda. We often find things, government changes in rules, new schemes, all of those kind of things will do really well. I also think like little known ways of readers finding out about extra funding they might be eligible for. I'm always coming across things that I feel like I didn't know about in terms of those kind of things. And having done it for like, 15 years, it still surprises me that I'm coming across things that I don't know about. So one of the ones that did really well recently was we did a story on a grant finder which you can use, and I think that's really applicable at the moment with so many people out of work and perhaps newly unemployed. People can search for a grant specific to their sector and find out about how to claim back any cash for that way. So that kind of stuff does really well. Lots of our readers now are on universal credit with unemployment soaring. We're seeing lots of interest in those kind of welfare benefits. And then anything kind of like core personal finance. So, insurance, mortgages, they're definitely first-time buyers. So they're very interested in that kind of areas. Any developments and new initiatives in those kind of areas are of interest to them. And any kind of like new ways for them to save money, new savings accounts. It's definitely more things that we would consider as more active that readers can get involved with. But then in the same way, they love to see people sharing their own kind of experiences of finances. So anything that I always say to my team, if you're pitching me a story and you wouldn't talk about it in the pub with your mates, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my rule of thumb.
The pub test. Yeah, we like that in the office too. And how about you, Adam? Perfect. Okay. So we kind of covered good topics and things. I always like to ask kind of about kind of pitch fails, and without kind of mentioning any names, brands, etc. Have you got any examples of where people have really missed the mark when pitching to you, so we kind of know what not to do?
Definitely. I think for me, the biggest thing that I see, from PRs and also from freelancers is an inability to like look at the website, where they would be pitching us stuff that we've never covered before and haven't personalized it. Because those kind of like blanket emails that are sent out and they're not personalized with any kind of follow-up of, I've seen you do this before and I thought it could fit in here. That will really work and will really catch my eye because it shows you put some extra thought into how it could work for us. And it's not just, trying to get it in anywhere. So I feel like that kind of stuff, and also why it should be of interest to my readers. In the same way that when my team pitched to me, I would expect the same back from anybody else.
Brilliant. Okay. Adam? Yeah. Great. Okay. And how can kind of PRs kind of optimize their stories for you? We've talked a little bit about case studies, Is there anything else you'd like to see in there? And also, I had another question actually, which is kind of linked, but how important are subject lines given that you receive so many emails? Like, how do you decide which ones to look at and which ones to ignore? Adam, do you want to answer that first? Yeah, don't know that trick. And are you looking for subject lines that look like the type of headlines that the Telegraph would write themselves, or does that not bother you so much? Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. How about you, Tara?
I think data is really important. Something that because often with personal finance stories, they don't lend themselves to the best pictures, and we're often stuck with many a stock image.
Yeah.
I feel like I know Getty quite well these days, but yeah, if there's any way of turning it into a really interesting graphic or a graph or something that might be useful to our readers that would help brighten up our newsletter or brighten up our homepage, I find that really, really useful. So we need the raw data because we have our own graphics team, but
Okay.
it's always great to see it for graphics and we can recreate them as well. So that's not necessarily a problem. Also, anything that might be video content, we have a really good video team. I do lots of videos myself, and it's something that our team is really interested in getting onto the other platforms. So we have a YouTube channel, we host videos on site, and we also have our Snapchat team who turn our stories into Snapchat stories, which is always kind of goes over my head a little bit, but it's really amazing. And we get so much feedback on money stories on there. So we know that they're really engaged. So those kind of places are really interesting. If there has been data sourced from like social as well, so if it's like a TikTok trend or a Facebook trend, I find that is really, really useful as well. And then in terms of subject lines, I have people like my friends email me, I'll be honest, all the time. And they say, "Did you not get my email?" Like they text me like a week later and I'm like, absolutely just did not see it. So I miss them all the time, which can be a big problem. So for me, I always read a subject line if it's kind of personalized. So it's something like, Tara, I've got a pitch for online for, and it says, something really succinct about what that pitch might be.
Okay.
That would really work for me because otherwise it's just a sea of emails and sometimes I do
Yeah.
miss them.
Okay. So anything that stands out as more personal to you and what you cover, but also kind of sums up the story quickly.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's really interesting. So would that be us or PRs just laying out this could be the first story, this is second, or just here's a few different angles for this kind of topic? Brilliant. Okay, that's really interesting. So, um, we're kind of wrapping up now, but I always like to ask kind of all my guests if they could just share kind of one piece of advice. And I'm probably putting you on the spot, both of you now, but if you just had one bit of advice to share with PRs, and it might be kind of subject lines, or it might be like I don't know what it might be, but it's always good to kind of end on kind of that note. Adam? Mm. Brilliant, thank you. How about you, Tara?
I would really agree with the personalization of a pitch, but also, don't be disheartened if it's not quite right this time, because it's really great to make contact with somebody and learn a bit more about what they need and what will work for them, because that relationship and contact might be useful in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. How do you feel about kind of introductions from PRs saying, this is the brand we kind of represent, this is what we cover. Would this kind of be any of use to you?
Definitely, I find it really useful. Sometimes it's just about refreshing in my mind and also my team's mind, so I don't mind passing that message on to them as well, because realistically, day to day, they're doing a lot more of the writing than I am. This is a good person to contact about this, or and also if they're very speedy as well, that with online, that will always help with the kind of features and our long-term stories and campaign stories and stuff that we do for print. That will is less time sensitive, and we have a bit more time usually to get ahead with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, just kind of knowing that the person is a good contact who you can reach, and will be able to give you a good soundbite.
Okay, and that's a really nice point actually. We haven't really covered response times, and I know sometimes things get covered if you just get back to journalists quickly. How quickly do you need a response from PRs?
So we break a story within 3 minutes. That's our time of it going live. And then probably within 10 minutes, the story's been written if it's a breaking news story.
Wow, oh, that is quick.
So yeah, it's really quick. I mean, obviously, we're always looking to improve something. So if a comment comes through that is really worthwhile, it may be that we will update it. But I would say within an hour, you're pretty much looking at something being written. That is for a really big agenda leading topic of the day online, and those you've got until about 4 p.m. for kind of the print deadline. So that's a good gauge if you really wanted to send over a good comment, but it just did need a bit more time signing off.
Okay.
With those longer term stories that aren't breaking news, you've definitely got a bit more time, and it's just probably worth asking, how much time does it need? Because I don't know about you, Adam, but I always go to multiple people to get comment. I'm always really upfront about it, but usually it's just a really good way of making sure I get what I need for the story within the deadline. Mm.
Okay, as long as that's obvious. Brilliant. Okay, it sounds like really good advice, and it's really interesting to hear about response times and how quickly breaking news stories go live. Right, let's see if we've got any questions. And just bear with me a moment. Let me just put my glasses on. That makes it a little bit easier. So, I've got a question here. So, what is your linking policy and what would make you want to link? That's a good question. What would make you want to link? Does that include tools? So, like Tara mentioned, if there was a specific kind of tax tool or something, or a grant tool. Right. Okay. How about you, Tara?
Preferably, if we can embed a tool, that is my preferred way of doing it. But sometimes it slows down the page really a lot, so we might not do that, and we'll link. I tend to advise that linking is really, if it's really helpful to the reader, then we will link, but we wouldn't just link for just linking's sake. And that's purely just because Google will mark us down if there's too many external links in there. But if there's useful links, then it sees as positive.
Great. Okay. So another question here. Would you be receptive to PRs pitching you an idea for an FOI, or would you rather they just came to you at the end of the cycle with the findings and press release?
I think it would be really great to have the conversation if they're going to give it to us as an exclusive, because you don't want to waste your time. And we all know how time consuming they can be. So I think it would be best if you're going to pitch it in as an exclusive to kind of discuss that with the journalist beforehand.
Great. Okay. Okay. And we've already talked about kind of quotes and things, but what is your take on expert commentary? Do you want to answer that, Adam? Yeah. So really, you're looking for specifics for specific advice rather than anything kind of that's more of an overview. Yeah. And Tara?
I think it's just having an opinion on something. So being able to put a slant on to why that might be happening and why that is of interest for some reader. Equally, if the expert is more comfortable with me picking up the phone and having a chat with them, I much prefer to do that. I find that it's a lot easier to get what we need from it. So yeah, always keen to have chats with experts on their field.
Brilliant. Okay. Okay, got quite a few questions coming through, which is great. When pitching a story that has a supporting page or campaign page, would you rather an intro email with a press release or a brief email introducing the story with a link to the campaign page? Adam?
That's a good question, really.
Great. And what are your thoughts, Tara?
So with those kind of campaigns, like, the change.org kind of campaigns, we don't tend to cover them because our readers are usually, the numbers of people who are signing them are usually quite small compared to other readers we have. So for me, it would have to be a kind of case study hook as to why we would want to do that and why that would be of interest. So yeah, definitely include all the information and link to the campaign page, but also, how can we tailor that for our audience?
Yeah. Okay. I've got an interesting question here because it's quite timely. So, how do you approach stories from payday loan companies? They often have bad press. How do you navigate this? Who wants this one?
I don't mind. Our readers are definitely the kind of people that may need to rely on payday loans, or perhaps have relied on payday loans in the past. For me, I would on the side of caution, but I am really open to alternatives to high cost credit. So if there is a genuine reason why this payday lender is better than any of the others out there because it's providing a much lower rate or something that's really innovative, that would be of interest to me. But as a general rule, we have a campaign against high cost credit. We want to make it fairer for our readers. So I think it probably speaks volumes in terms of how we would rely on them for data or anything, any kind of stories.
Definitely. Do you want to kind of comment on that, Adam? Okay. And this is a good question for you, Adam. So, what are your thoughts on ethical investing and covering this as a topic? Mhm. Great, okay. And last question, which I'll give to you, Tara. If you receive a pitch that you like the story, do you tend to reply to let the PR know?
It really varies. So if it's something that's going to be a quick news story, I tend to just forward it onto my team, and then one of them will pick it up. So I kind of will assign the story. So I would expect them to get back in touch and let them know. They probably have additional questions, so that will be the kind of route. If it's something that I think will work for us as part of something bigger, I definitely will take the time to reply. So yeah, essentially they should be replying.
Okay. Lovely. Okay. I think that's a really nice way to end the webinar. So thank you again to Adam and to Tara for giving up your lunchtime and your time. And I know we've had some issues with technical aspects of this, so I really appreciate you bearing with us. So thank you for everyone who's joined us today. I hope it's been really insightful. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure my team has too. Please do join us for our next webinar, which is on the 2nd of March, and we're going to be talking about ideation. And it's going to be kind of more of a 40-minute special because there's so much to cover on how you come up with ideas, who should be involved, when you get stuck in ruts, and we're covering everything. And we're going to be joined by Mark Johnston, who has been a creative content consultant for a long time, and he really knows his stuff. So I will be providing more details and a link to that very soon. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you to my guests, and I hope I'll see you all very soon. Thank you.